Good morning, everybody. Welcome into our FreightWaves Now Community Spotlight. I'm Kaylee Nix, and it's Friday, so it is time to catch up with Running on Ice, the coolest community in freight. And Mary, we're talking cold chain. The weather is finally cool as well. We had our first hard freeze here in Chattanooga over this week. Most of the country is dipping down into that cool little chilly space. It's spooky season, it's fall weather, and I'm excited about it.
I am very excited as well. My toes are not pretty much all morning. My toes have been icicles. But it is time for my favorite time of the year, which is to warm my feet up on my wonderful husband's legs. And he hates it, but it's time-honored tradition at this point in time.
It's just girly things. That's exactly what that is. We've got another great episode of Running on Ice headed your way on this Friday afternoon. The folks from Blue Yonder are joining you today and talk to us a little bit about what they do and where they're at in the cold chain space.
Yeah, so we today on this episode, it's something that is kind of top of mind for most people as everyone's kind of going out getting their flu shots or their COVID boosters, or it's just 'tis the season for vaccinations, if you will. So this time we kind of talk about the vaccine supply chain, and really, when you have flu season and other diseases that are kind of running rampant at the moment, how it's determined which region gets priority on which vaccines, and kind of how these different components really come together. Because a lot of times when you do see those shortages, it's not necessarily in the actual medicine itself; it's in the components that you need, the syringes, and other things like that you need to administer this medicine. So we really kind of dive into how that gets prioritized and who is the one prioritizing it, and different components that we look at to make sure that, we're able to help the most amount of people. So it's actually really kind of fascinating to get into the kind of the why behind, who gets their flu shots first.
The topic of pharmaceutical and medical supply chain is also really top of mind for a lot of folks, because one of the consequences and some of the devastation from Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina was actually to some of the companies that produce a majority of the IV fluid bags that we see used in hospitals and all over the place. We actually have a shortage of IV fluids going on. And that's a little different than what we're talking about with Blue Yonder, because obviously fluids and fluid bags aren't necessarily those cold chain, very temperature sensitive materials, but it does go to show how just one small disruption can really mess with what is life-saving treatment for a lot of these folks. When it comes to that vaccine strategy, we all know that we are kind of on this cyclical or very predictable cyclical cycle now when it comes to flu, COVID, RSV, right? Those are those three vaccines that we typically see people get in a seasonal fashion. How does that kind of change demand planning for some of these cold chain logistics providers when they're looking at the seasonality of how these diseases work?
Yeah, it's really kind of turned it on its head, So there hasn't, to my knowledge, I mean, I'm not going to be claiming to be the first expert in pharmaceutical supply chain, but there hasn't always been a super big busy season, or a peak season, if you will, for vaccines. You're gonna see a slight uptick in some in August, as all of your kindergartners or your school age children are going to get their vaccines they need for their school year. But really, this has kind of led to, I don't want to call it a peak season, but almost like just shy of a peak season of, that you're going to need a lot more syringes. You're going to need a lot more supplies. You're going to need a lot of components that go together to make this medicine. So it really has had to structure that demand planning, but then also, due to different political factors or geographical locations, there is some of that demand planning as well. So whether that is people not getting vaccines or not having access to getting them, it really goes into, like you mentioned, all of that stuff that goes into that demand planning. So it's really important to know kind of what areas you're servicing and the regions, and then also how much vaccine you'll need, because you don't want to throw it away at the end of the day, because that's kind of the worst case scenario, because not only is that product getting lost, but that also means that that's not people that it's missing out on people that are able to, potentially get the help that they need. So it's something that is kind of, I think the whole medical supply chain, anytime there's a kink anywhere in it, it really kind of all comes I don't want to say it all comes down, but it definitely all starts to hurt as we're seeing kind of right now with those IV bag fluids. Even though it's not necessarily related to vaccines, it does overall start to impact the supply chain.
And then the other thing that we have to talk about when it comes to medical supply chain is the unique handling and storage requirements in regards to sterility and making sure that there's no cross contamination or even no room for potential of cross contamination. For a lot of the freight that we talk about, just regular freight, there's like almost this black hole of information, I think, where it's like, okay, went from the shipper, we loaded it into the carrier and something's happening, and then the receiver got it and product looks okay. But what happened in the middle there? And for medical supplies, vaccines specifically, there can't be that black hole of information because you have to be certain that things are good. What types of technologies have been adopted or are in the works of being adopted to make sure that that black hole of information doesn't exist when it comes to these really sensitive items?
Yeah, you really kind of hit the nail on the head. So, it doesn't, when you have, my favorite example is a pair of jeans. If you have a pair of jeans, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter what happens between point A and point B because there's still going to be a pair of jeans. You can still wear them. It's not going to be a problem. It's truly just going to, like, no matter what happens to these jeans, you can still use them as the way they're intended. That is not the case at all in medical supply chain. It even comes down to warehouses that you can store these supplies in. Are they sterile? Do they have the capabilities to tell you every single thing that surrounded this equipment? And, like if I have a box of vaccines, do I know where it is, what temperature it is, what humidity it is, and what's around it and the environment it's in throughout the entire process? So that's definitely a lot more than just, oh, I need a tracker on my supplies. Or, oh, I need to know, like we talked about, I think last week, oh, I need to know about those light, like I need to know when there's a light exposure or something like that. It's much more intense than that. And the really beautiful thing right now is that because we are kind of in, I like to call it this supply chain technical revolution, where we're seeing all these technologies come up. We're seeing these advancements make leaps and bounds from where we were 10 to 20 years ago. I mean, how many people are really faxing BOLs or handwriting BOLs to carriers anymore? We just don't see that, whereas that was more commonplace, 10 to 15 years ago. So we're seeing these huge jumps in technology that's more than just track and trace and visibility. It's all encompassing. And that has really, really helped kind of alleviate some of these concerns from these medical shippers to make sure that, none of their goods are getting contaminated. Because like you mentioned, when we do have a shortage, we need to make sure that everything that is coming out and is being produced we can't afford to lose any more product, So it's really important and crucial that all the rest of the supply chain is on board with it. And there's been some absolutely fantastic technologies that have come out to be able to say, hey, this is the entire environment that this has been in. And there's been some fantastic reporting from some of the shipping partners to make sure that all these goods are reliable, safe, and at the end of the day, don't end up harming anyone.
Well, we are excited to continue to see what those technologies develop and how they end up impacting our world, hopefully for more and more good. For the episode today, where can people go to find that? And then, of course, the companion newsletter that comes out with it, too.
Well, if you want to get into the nitty gritty today, you can just keep watching FreightWaves here on YouTube or anywhere else you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. The episode will be out at 2 p.m. today. And then if that's not enough cold chain news for you, you can subscribe to Running on Ice, the newsletter, on freightwaves.com/running on ice.
All right, Mary, thanks for joining us this morning. Have a great weekend. We'll catch up with you next Friday.
Bye, guys.